Okay, we're good to go. I'll declare the meeting open at 6:02. On behalf of the City of Vincent, I pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land, the Wadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'd like to also let members of the public gallery know that tonight we will be live web streaming this meeting, but we do care about your privacy, so we do not transmit the public question time part of the council meeting. That will just commence as soon as we finish having comments and questions from the public gallery. So before that happens, we'll just take apologies and members on approved leave of absence.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we've received apologies from Councillor Ros Harley, and also noting that Councillor Jimmy Murphy is currently on approved leave of absence. We also have an apology this evening from the City's Director Community Engagement, Michael Quirk.
Thank you, CEO. We'll now go to public question time and receiving of public statements. So if you would like to, you're very welcome to step up to the microphone. You have up to 3 minutes to address council, and we just do ask that you say your name And just to note that this is the first live streaming of our council briefing. We started off with our first council meeting being live streamed 3 weeks ago. So if anyone's joining us on the live stream, welcome to the meeting. We'll move through the agenda. Oh, sorry, first of all, before we do that, we'll take declarations of interest from the CEO.
Through you, Mayor Cole, council members, I've received a disclosure of impartiality interest from Mayor Emma Cole in relation to item 5.2. The extent of the Mayor's interest is that her sister and friends live on the boulevard in Mount Hawthorne. However, they are not neighbours of the development, have not contacted the Mayor to discuss the application, and the Mayor is also not aware of whether they have provided any comment during the consultation on the matter. Nevertheless, the Mayor's disclosed that as a consequence there may be a perception that her impartiality on the matter could be affected. She declares that she will consider the matter on its merits and vote accordingly at the council meeting next week. The second disclosure of interest, Mayor Cole and council, is in relation to item 11.1. It's a financial interest disclosure from me, Len Kosova, Chief Executive Officer. The nature of the interest is that item 11.1 concerns my performance review for the period of 2015-16. The obvious disclosure of interest that I have in the matter is that that report relates to my performance in the role of CEO, my employment contract with council, and also my remuneration under the contract. So I will not be involved in that matter at all.
Thank you, CEO. So we'll move through the reports and ask our questions of directors. Does anyone have any questions in relation to 5.1, which is 94 Burke Street, proposed 4 group dwellings? Councillor Gondaszewski.
Thank you, Mayor. Just through you to the Director of Development Services, just 2 quick things. One in relation to the setbacks. Would it be possible to obtain the specific setbacks used in the calculation and identify those that relate to properties that have been recently developed? It would also be useful to get the setback of the property across the road, as mentioned in the gallery. I'd also was wondering, in terms of the advice from the DAC, whether it's possible to get some confirmation that the advice from the DAC has been completely incorporated into the design or is reinforced in the conditions associated with the application.
In answer to the first question, I can probably just provide some general information, then I'll take the rest of that on notice. The setback calculation is based only on the residential properties on the one side. We can provide the calculation for that, but it doesn't consider the nil setback commercial development on the other side. In relation to the DAC's comments, the DAC considered the plans that you have before you, so there were no changes to the plans after the DAC's comments were provided. Those comments were specifically requested to be provided in the form of conditions that could potentially be included on the approval, and all of those comments are included as conditions. There's nothing that the DAC has said that isn't included there.
Are there any further questions? Yes, Councillor Buckles.
Thank you, Mayor. I just got a question through to the Director of Development Services. It was regarding to there's a condition we've applied regarding the roof pitch being increased to fit in with the street, and I just, I guess I was asking how that fits in, given that the property to one side is a flat roof commercial and the property on the other side is flat roofed residential. So I just might have thought that what was proposed kind of did fit in, given the context.
Through the Mayor, the DAC considered the overall streetscape. It's correct that there are examples of different built form outcomes on the street. However, the city's previous policy and its current policy certainly sets the desired future streetscape as one which has a pitched roof generally. There are obviously going to be situations where a flat pitched development would fit in with a streetscape, such as a carport or a different form of dwelling that used other elements from that streetscape instead of the roof pitch. In this case, the DAC considered that roof pitch was a fundamental part of this streetscape, and so recommended that the pitch be changed to align more closely with the majority of the developments you see on that street, particularly the traditional ones.
Any further questions? Councillor Loden? No? Okay. We'll move on to 5.2, which is 193 to 195 Scarborough Beach Road, Mount Hawthorne. This is a change of use from plant nursery and incidental shop and eating house to eating house and incidental shop and plant nursery. Are there any questions on this item? Councillor Hallett?
Yeah, just firstly, I guess from through the Mayor to the Director of Development Services, in relation to the comment from the public gallery around whether any other venues in that area pay a cash in lieu parking fee?
Through the Mayor, I don't have that information. I'm not sure whether others have been required to pay the cash in lieu or not, but we will take that on notice and provide that information to you.
Director, if I could just follow up on that, just for the benefit of the public gallery and in particular Katerina, could you just explain how cash in lieu works and when the requirement for cash in lieu is actually applied, just to provide some clarification around that?
Certainly. So the parking standards the city has for each development are based on the demand for parking that each use or development generates. So the requirement of all planning schemes generally, and particularly in this context, the city's planning scheme, is that the parking generated by a development is contained on site and provided for on site. Where a development doesn't provide that parking on site, so there's not enough parking on site to accommodate the intensity or the form of development proposed, the city will, and the city's policy allows the applicant to pay cash in lieu for that car parking, so that the city can then provide that car parking in the immediate vicinity for that development. In the case of other developments in the area, the city would again take that approach, and unless there was unless it was demonstrated that there wasn't a need for that parking because the development accommodated all the parking necessary on site, then typically cash in lieu would not be waived and the cash in lieu would be required.
And just to clarify that in this case it's tied to the 150 people maximum that's part of this application?
Yes, through you, the applicant has applied to have a maximum of 150 people on site at any one time. That's the maximum. It's not the average, it's the maximum. That's the basis for the calculation for the parking demand.
Councillor Loden?
Through the Mayor, just two questions. Firstly, the noise measures were taken around the site based on the orientation of the patrons being at the front of the facility, and I hazard a guess that if they moved to the rear of the city, that might change the noise that's occurring on the boundary for the neighbours there. And so is there a way to manage that through the process? And then my second one was in terms of proposing alternative parking, where the report suggested there was some locations proposed, but do you have any more details on where those extra parking bays potentially would go?
Through the Mayor, I'll take the second question on notice and we'll provide that information in detail to councillors as part of the briefing notes. In relation to noise, the assessment, the acoustic report that was provided with the application considered an individual day in which I think the acoustic consultant quoted that there was 130 people on site at the time. We don't have the details of exactly where they were sitting, but I think we can assume comfortably that if there's 130 people and 150 is the max, that they would have been spread out throughout the development. So it was probably a good indication of the sound volumes. Nevertheless, there may be concern around those sound volumes occurring late at night when the noise regulations have much lower standards to comply with. And so there does need to be further analysis of that. And as part of that process, there would potentially be the ability for that acoustic report to say, require that after 9 p.m. that patrons can only be located inside within the area that's bound by those, the cafe blinds, or that there'd be some other restrictions such as outdoor music can't be, the speakers can't be on, etc. So yes, there is the ability to do that through the conditions that have been constructed.
Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you. I'm happy for these to be taken on notice, but just a couple of questions in relation to the car parking policy. So the existing car parking shortfall section of the policy doesn't exist because there wasn't an approved shortfall for the previous use. Is that correct? With the approval of the eating house at 29 square metres, was there a shortfall approved at that time?
Through the Mayor, there was a shortfall approved, and cash in lieu was paid for that shortfall. So those bays count towards the development. That's my understanding.
Okay. So just carrying on from that and just reading from the policy. So that relates to the existing shortfall does apply because then it's not vacant land and there's not 75% or more of the building being constructed. So effectively the previous shortfall does carry forward. So if we can just confirm that has been included in the calculation. And just in terms of, and I know that this was my bugbear, but it now sits in the policy, so I will ask about it, the waiving of car parking requirements. So effectively, clause 2.4 of the car parking policy says the waiving of car parking requirements, it's at the city's discretion, absolutely, but it's can waive the car parking requirements for change of use applications to provide additional on-site car parking, including waiving cash in lieu, A, where the application does not involve the reduction of existing on-site parking bays as part of the application. I understand that it meets that requirement. B, the application does not involve any building works that contribute to the additional floor area that would be subject to parking requirements. Is that it meets that requirement as well?
Through the Mayor, it's open to interpretation. Certainly is not proposing any additional building works that would lead to additional floor space, but it is proposing to use the outdoor al fresco area for that floor space, essentially.
And clause C talks about a current planning approval requiring cash in lieu has not been acted upon, including the payment of cash in lieu. It doesn't say whether it needs to meet all or any of those. So I guess my question is in two parts. One, in the city's view, do those clauses apply? And two, where those clauses have applied since it's been as part of the policy, have we ever not waived cash in lieu? And I ask that question only because my understanding is, and again I speak openly that I opposed this clause when it was in there, but my understanding is where the intent of that clause has been met, cash in lieu has been waived in each instance since then. So my question is, does it meet that requirement? And if it does, are there examples where the city hasn't waived cash in lieu since the inception of that clause?
I'll take that second part on notice because I'm not sure whether the city has or has not waived cash in lieu in certain circumstances. I'd have to go back and have a look at the history of that. But in essence, this application is retrospective, and so it's open to interpretation how it's applied, and I'll provide a discussion around that as part of the briefing notes as well.
Perhaps if I could just ask a question in relation to the maximum number. I think it's difficult because we're dealing with a retrospective application, but I'm just interested to know whether 150 is actually what's currently happening at the moment or whether that's actually an increase given that impacts on the car parking and the cash in lieu. And the second part of the question is about the fact that the city has identified a need for additional car parking in the area and that we currently have money on the draft 2017-18 budget to do some, I think it's 90-degree car parking on the boulevard, whether we could actually just get, I can look it up in the budget, but it might just be helpful just to have that presented as part of the notes in terms of the cost and the number of bays, and the proximity to the development.
Just in relation to the first point, through you, Mayor, the applicant has advised the city that they are operating up to 150 patrons currently. So yes, that's the current situation and what they've applied for. And we'll provide that information around the potential location of car parking bays and the potential cost of those as part of the briefing notes as well.
Councillor Buckles.
Thank you, Mayor. Another question through to the Director of Development Services. When I was reading the report, and I apologise if I'd missed the emphasis, but I thought that the change of use retrospective was really to enable the shop to be ancillary to the to the dining rather than the other way. And that I thought, well, obviously it was originally a garden centre with a cafe, and then they've been opening the cafe beyond opening the other. So it was sort of a switch. Is there more to it than that? Obviously, the toilets have been triggered as well in requiring new toilets to be constructed. But are there any other changes to the actual operation of it other than, as I say, I thought the retrospective was about allowing the use to continue beyond the hours of the shop and sort of flipping it around, so you can't. They won't be allowed to have the shop open on its own in future.
Through the Mayor, the major change, as you've described, is the number of patrons coming to the restaurant, and the fact that previously, the current approval is for a plant nursery with whatever number, with an incidental cafe where some of the patrons that come to the plant nursery might have a coffee while they're in the plant nursery, where this proposal is about allowing up to 150 people to come to a restaurant or an eating house, and for some of those to go and walk through the plant nursery. So, that's the substance of the change.
Are there any further questions on this item? Okay, I'll move on to 5.3, which is 211 Scarborough Beach Road. This is the application for a change of use to service station. Actually, it involves demolition and construction. Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions to the Director of Development Services. So I'm looking at attachment 4, page 104. Just in relation to the comments, in the City's comments in relation to some of the submissions that were made. So in relation to the location, I understand, so that in the first box where it says, the first box in particular, but talking about being too close to residential areas, that's summarised in the reasons for refusal. The impact on the existing deli and shops next door. So points 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6 really, so other than the view that it's too close to the residential areas, the next 6 points just confirm, because it says these comments are generally supported. I would imagine, I just want to confirm that those comments are generally supported, because normally next to comments such as that we either hear that those are governed by other regulations, or that they're not planning considerations, things like the impact on the existing deli. Can you just confirm that the City does actually support those comments, or whether some of those comments are actually not relevant to the application?
Through the Mayor, I've noticed that now too, so thanks for pointing that out. We'll update the report to make it clear what the City's position is on each of those. Certainly in relation to the first comment, the first comment from the submissions, the City's response is consistent, but for the remaining points there needs to be a corresponding comment against each of those. So we'll update that as part of the final agenda.
Thank you. And just for clarity, so because there seems to be, in terms of some of the objections and community sentiment, seems to be related more so to the residences or otherwise, but it is zoned local centre. And so are we clear, am I correct that the issue is predominantly the service station use rather than the convenience store use, which is of concern to the officers? Is that correct?
Yes, through the Mayor, the land use is service station, so the convenience store is an incidental part to that service station, but the concern is with the service station. That's correct.
Councillor Loden.
Through the Chair, just the question from the floor earlier about air quality, and thank you for your email earlier as well about this question. So I'm not sure, John, if you heard the question around air quality impacts, and is that a valid basis for which we could include in the refusal?
Through the Mayor, it is a valid consideration, and one of the refusal reasons quite generally covers the impact. Just let me find out, remember which one that is, or have a look through to see which one it is. Yeah, so in relation to refusal reason 1, and there is further discussion in relation to the EPA guidance statement in the report as well, which covers off on air quality issues. So it is covered off generally, but it's not mentioned specifically in the refusal reasons. We could, if the council wished, take an amendment to provide detailed reasons for each of those issues in accordance with what the EPA guidance statement requires to be considered.
Councillor Loden.
Would that add any strength to the refusal?
I don't believe it's necessarily required, and the requirements of the EPA guidance are very clear, set out in the council's in the report to council. I mean, it wouldn't hurt. So I can take that question on notice and go through those issues and provide some further information as part of the briefing notes if you'd prefer.
If it helps, I'm happy to flag an amendment and put it forward. I thought it was there in the body of the report under EPA buffer zones, etc., but I think that in keeping with the numerous reasons for refusal, it doesn't hurt to add another one to it. Councillor Hallett.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to the Director of Development Services. Just wondering if the applicant discussed their intentions for the site with the City prior to putting in the application?
Good question. Director?
Through the Mayor, I'll need to take that on notice. I won't comment any further at this time.
I would like to follow up on that, Director, just to say that given that the grounds for recommended refusal are numerous and they're strong grounds, have you had discussions with the applicant through this process to keep them aware of the City's concerns over the non-compliant aspects of the proposed development?
The City has certainly gone through each of these issues that are raised in the report and the reasons for refusal on numerous occasions with the applicant. The applicant has made it clear that they'd like the application determined as it is, despite those concerns.
Councillor Hallett.
Sorry, one last one through you to the Director of Development Services. How long has the site been vacant? Sorry if I missed that in the report.
I don't believe that's in the report, and I can take that on notice and provide that to you too.
I can actually answer that question for you. It's currently not vacant. It's I'm not quite sure what the arrangements are between the landowner and the tenant, but the Red Cross has moved in 2 weeks ago and is running an op shop and drop off service at that location. So it's currently, I'm not sure if it's a pop up or what the terms are, but it's currently got a tenant in it. Director, I just wanted to ask about the EPA buffer zone. I noticed that in one page it refers to 200 metre buffer, and then on another page later into the report it talks about a 50 metre buffer. So I just wanted to seek some clarification around that, and also whether the distance to the childcare centre on the corner of Buxton and Scarborough Beach Road could also be included in the report.
I'll take that on notice and provide that information.
Any further questions on this? Okay, we'll move on to item 5.4, which is proposed amended parking restrictions in the Mount Hawthorne Town Centre. Do I have any questions on this item? Thank you. Councillor Loden.
Just two questions for me. Firstly, on page 113, the peak occupancy is over 100% on, I think it's Scarborough and Edinburgh Street. I assume that's a typo, but I just wanted to clarify if I was missing something there.
Through the Mayor, it's not a typo. They are the accurate numbers based on the number of vehicles that were parking in no stopping zones, on verges, in areas that weren't parking bays.
And my second one is just around attachment 6 just shows the changes, but is there a way we can show the places, like for example Fairfield Street is 2p still, just to clarify that like a map that shows what it will look like at the end of this process if the amendments are put through?
Yes, we can provide that information in the briefing notes, along with a plan of the current restrictions, which the report will be updated to include that information, along with some further information and clearer clarification of exactly what's changing in the report.
Just to follow up on that, Councillor Loden, I did raise with the Director today that Attachment 4 and Attachment 6 were quite confusing around them both saying that they were proposed changes but looking slightly different, and that would be helpful to have one of what's proposed and one of what we currently have. Are there any further questions? Okay, I have a few. Director, I was just wondering whether there's any change to existing restrictions to increase the time period of the restrictions. You can take that one on notice. That was just after our experience in North Perth, where there was one small section of a street which actually experienced a change from 2p to 5p. So I just wanted to make sure that we don't, that we are sort of across what's happening in here. And just in terms of when, if this matter does proceed, just some clarification around letters going out to residents clarifying the permit process and criteria and application process to be included.
I might answer those two.
Sure.
So in relation to the first question, we'll provide that map making it clear what the existing parking restrictions are. We have reviewed that in detail, and there are changes, so we need to make that crystal clear in the report and provide that plan to illustrate that. In relation to the parking restrictions, there are two small sections of street where additional parking restrictions are going to be included. The city will be writing to all of those residents, explaining to them how the parking permit process works, offering them parking permits, and going through the process that we followed in North Perth. And we'll follow the same process in relation to enforcement for a period of time, giving people that park without parking permits the opportunity to get their parking permits before they are fined or infringed.
And just in relation to Fairfield Street, this information will come out through that, but I just wanted clarification on whether it's going to be 1p day and night or 2p during the day and 1p in the evening, and what, in terms of signage, whether that's going to create any confusion.
Are you speaking about the section of Fairfield Street north of Scarborough Beach Road, or the southern part?
The southern part down from the hotel.
So that southern part, there's no change proposed. So the current restriction for the majority of it is on the western side, 1p, 5 a.m. to 5 p.m. And on the eastern side, I'll need to take that on notice too, but I think it's resident-only parking from memory.
And just in terms of the way in which the survey was carried out, I know that the report talks about the transport plan informing a further review of car parking. I would hope that that's a more holistic approach to the Mount Hawthorne Town Centre, just noting that streets like the Boulevard, Berryman, Kalgoorlie, all around Braithwaite, and some of the other streets that are impacted by town centre car parking weren't considered as part of this review. Is that something that you could address?
Indeed, the transport strategy will look at the Mount Hawthorne Town Centre holistically. That's the approach that was taken for North Perth. There was a holistic assessment of and survey done of all of North Perth and the surrounding areas, not just the areas that currently have parking restrictions. This survey was done based on the fact that we had available budget to undertake a survey. We were restricted to the area that had parking restrictions and a small area just outside of that. However, it wasn't a holistic assessment of the parking restrictions in Mount Hawthorne and the impact that they have on the surrounding residential areas. So that is something that will be done as part of the transport strategy work and the review of the car parking strategy, and will address the concerns from areas that are outside of this survey area that this report deals with. Sorry, just if I may, in relation to Fairfield Street, it is 1p on both sides of the road, and then resident-only parking just on the western side of the road.
Thank you, Director. Are there any further questions on this item? Okay, we'll move on to the last planning item for the evening, which has been a late item, so you may not have your questions prepared on this one, but it's a submission to WELGA on third-party appeal rights in planning. Has anyone had the opportunity to read that and ask any questions? Councillor Toppelberg?
Yeah, just that I did. Just, I suppose it's more a question around structure. So we've been requested by WELGA to make a submission to them, which is obviously the intent of clause 1 of the recommendation. Clause 2, I understand, and clause 3, I understand the first part. I'm just questioning whether the next part of clause 3, is this the right place for it? Should it be a separate clause? Should it be something separate? And I know this is being discussed in a public forum, and I'm quite comfortable with that, but just in terms of actually the city's position, tying a specific planning decision directly to the the broader view on third-party rights of appeal and representation, are we better off potentially splitting that up and having that making those assertions separately? I don't know that we should be tying our view on third-party appeals necessarily directly to a planning decision of another body, effectively.
That point's taken. I'll consider that as part of finalising the report. As I said, the conclusion of that report is not finalised, so no, it's a valid point, and it's something I'll take on board. Certainly, that application is certainly the most concerning example of the need for third-party appeal rights, essentially, for local governments in particular.
I actually think it's an excellent case study, and you know that it's good to have that in the body of the report at the very least.
Just a further question. I understand I'm going through a process at the moment, so in relation to it's actually in relation to restraint of trade clauses, but effectively the case law that surrounds that says that you effectively take a tiered approach whereby you give reasonable periods of time and then reasonable territory. So if you wish to restrict somebody trading in a certain area, let's say if you have an agreement and that agreement comes to an end, and the way in which the agreement is structured, that it is 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, and the territory might be the CBD of Perth, Western Australia, the Southern Hemisphere or globally, and the court then picks the most appropriate effectively, because if you ask for one and you don't get it, then the answer is a yes or no. So I guess in a similar way, are we seeking third-party appeal rights for, as is requested in clause 1, or is it specifically for local government, and then at a second tier to allow, what's the actual wording of it, to immediately affected or submitter immediately affected by the development? Is that considered to be the whole, or is it a tiered preference?
It's not proposed to be a tiered preference. It's proposed to be a rights. The recommendation is that third-party appeal rights be provided to both local government and directly affected submitters in the case of DAP applications. Yep.
I do have a question. I got as far as reading the recommendation, and I was just, it could be in the body of the report, but I just wanted to ask about what we are defining as immediately affected when we're talking about third-party appeal rights for a submitter who is immediately affected. Would that mean that they would have to be an immediate neighbour or in proximity, or that their amenity was somehow affected. It's just the use of the word immediate, and is that proximity or is it broader than that?
It isn't in the body of the report because it would be in the conclusion when it's finalised, but it will be those properties that are adjoining, that are immediately affected by a variation, for lack of a better word, that affects them. So that's the proposal.
So the conclusion will talk about immediately adjoining to the development in question. Okay.
Correct.
Councillor Hallett.
Just to follow up to that, I guess, through you, Mayor, to the Director of Development Services, is there potential for it to include, interest groups that have an interest in a site that is perhaps next to wetlands or an environmentally vulnerable location?
There's the potential for that, but that's not what this recommendation is proposing. The local government would have the ability to appeal such a situation if the recommendation is carried through and implemented by the state government, but the recommendation is for only those properties that are immediately affected, as in adjoining and affected by a variation.
That could also stand for something like Needleville Connect if they were opposed, but then I guess it's also comes down to the ability to afford legal action as well. Councillor Toppelberg.
Sorry, just for clarity, is that, and I did read some of it, but not all of the discussion paper from Walga, the immediately affected being the adjoining properties. Is that what's proposed from there? And the reason I ask is that there are, I can think already of a number of sites where we've had contentious issues where the developer either did or during the development process did actually buy the adjacent sites to effectively buy out objectors. I suppose that there is obviously the right for the city to then make appeal, but is that specifically mentioned in the discussion paper that the immediately affected neighbours would be the immediately adjacent?
Yes, the discussion paper talks about those properties that have an interest, a specific interest in that property, and they are defined as being the immediately adjoining properties, essentially. So the answer to your question is yes.
Through you, Mayor Cole, for what it's worth, in that context, it might even be worth the city considering to use the abutting landowner or affected adjoining landowner interpretation under the Local Government Act, disclosure of proximity interest requirements, which relates to any immediately abutting property as well as properties directly across a road, right-of-way, etc., and diagonally opposite from the subject land.
Councillor Buckles.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Another question through to the Director of Development Services. It's just regarding, I haven't read the WALGA discussion paper, but is the WALGA discussion paper purely about DAP decisions, or is it about third-party appeal rights for anybody? And then a follow-on from that is, are we advocating that someone could have a third-party appeal against a decision of the council for a non-DAP decision?
Director.
Through the Mayor, the discussion paper, WALGA's discussion paper, is generally about third-party appeal rights. So it's not just about DAPs. The discussion paper makes it clear that the previous WALGA position, which was to not support third-party appeal rights, was based on the planning framework in 2008, which has now significantly changed with the introduction of DAPs, changes to the deemed provisions, and changes to a number of other situations and decision-making powers of local government. The proposal of this report is to recommend that WALGA support, recommend WALGA support third-party appeal rights and lobby for third-party appeal rights for local governments and immediately affected adjoining property owners and adjacent property owners where in relation to DAP decisions. So it's not proposing that third-party appeal rights exist for council decisions because it's clear that the council is the democratically elected body that represents the community, moving the power to make that decision from local government who does represent the community and is accountable to the community and transparent to the community, moving that power to the State Administrative Tribunal, which is a appointed body The community has no role in appointing that body. They're not accountable to the community, and they have significantly less transparency than local government does, would actually be removing the rights of the community in having a say as part of that process, and would create a system where there are two parties arguing about a proposal or debating a proposal in SAT, and those two parties, whether it be one resident from down the road and the developer, they would have that discussion without the community's involvement and without the council's involvement, which is currently the process that SAT follows for appeals by developers.
Councillor Buckles. Will the Welga discussion paper be an attachment to this report? Yes, okay, because it's worth looking at because it talks about the different Australian jurisdictions and the different models that they have. So I would recommend that you have a read. Are there any further questions on this item? Councillor Buckles, you look like you want to ask a question.
Oh, I just, given our position is to, preferred position is to not have DAPs, I actually think that our community, if there is a DAP-like decision to be made and the DAP doesn't exist and we've made the decision for a right street and we decided to put 5 stories there, I actually think the community position would be that they want third-party appeal rights against whoever the decision maker is. That's not really a question, but you see where I'm getting from. And then I know that it leads to a situation with 2, but isn't that the same situation now? You go to a SAT. Okay, the question though is it third-party appeal against a decision of the SAT? Because the DAP may have said no to Wright Street, and it still may have been approved by SAT. Are we addressing third-party appeals against a decision of SAT without the DAP having approved it?
We're not addressing that. That's not been addressed in the discussion paper, and it's not being addressed in the report. The scope of it relates to essentially decisions by the city and the DAP, but further commentary can be put in the report regarding that specific issue. There is some discussion in this report around the SAT and their structure and the issues that presents because of the way they're appointed and the way that system operates. So we can certainly add some commentary around that issue.
Anything further on this item? Okay, we're moving on from planning. Thank you, Director for Development Services. Firstly, in tech services, we have the Hyde Street Reserve proposed extension. Do I have any questions on this item? Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you. Welcome to the hot seat, Mr. Wilson. A few questions. Firstly, has there been any discussion with 49 Forest Street or 82 Alma Road at all thus far? Have we knocked on their door or had any discussions at all with them?
Through the Mayor, short answer is I don't know because to date, Parks Manager Jeremy and obviously the Director, Mr. Lotsnicker, were running with this project, but I can take that on notice and find out.
I would be very reticent to put my hand up to send it to advertising, having not at least spoken to them. I think I'll just say now, because we've got a week before we make that decision, that I think it would seem odd considering the significant impact that it has on those two properties for them just to receive a letter in their letterbox. So it might be an idea just to maybe.
So the question is, could we approach those immediate neighbours if they haven't already been before the Tuesday meeting to determine whether we advertise this item?
That's a great question. Thank you for your wise counsel. My other two questions. So the park is currently fenced. It says here that the existing fence to be relocated or removed. And then there's also some dotted lines saying relocated fence. So I'm looking at the plan. Am I correct then that there would be, the proposal suggests unfettered access, for want of a better term, from the south, from Alma Road through what's currently the driveway, or depicted as the driveway, the new red asphalt path and flush curb, and then there is a gate proposed for the other end. So there's effectively vehicular access for those two properties at 82 Alma and 49 Forest from Alma only, but the park remains otherwise fenced, except for the small opening which I assume would be 3 metres wide to the southern portion. Is that correct?
Through the chair, that is correct, yes.
And the property at 49 Forest Street, given that they have a roller door to the rear, their right of access to that is not directional. Is that are there any issues in legal terms if we were to obviously if it was a right of way we wouldn't be able to block off one end or the other, I assume, but is it the same with a designated road that they don't have rights of access from Forest Street? I'm just confirming that we can actually block off the Forest Street access and only allow access from Alma to that driveway.
Through the chair, I believe when last we discussed this, there was some conjecture as to whether their garage is actually part of that double driveway there, and that other roller door, it just gives them access to the backyard. It's not for a vehicle access. And that was to be confirmed.
Councillor Loden.
Through the chair, just a couple of queries. Did we consider not having a path as an option? We sort of did loosely discuss this last week, but I guess we were told not to get into designing the open space because we'd have opportunity to do that. But I guess some of the things that I'd like to see considered, or that we could consider, would... hang on, how do I phrase that as a question? Did we consider not having a path through there? And do we know how many bikes would use that route as a pathway to get around? And is there an option to move the path to the east to create a larger sort of continuous open space? And also, just from the plans, could you clarify where the fencing is on that? It wasn't really... It says the fencing is proposed to be moved. It looks like it's included at the top, but I'm not sure if it's being included at the bottom as well.
Through the chair, I'll start with the last question first. There is that portion of fencing either side of the vehicle access on the southern side, which are those two darker, thick black lines. In respect to the traffic volumes, we can have a look at the data to see if we can actually separate out how many bikes were using that in the past, so I can take that one on notice and do some research on it. Potentially, yes, the path could be moved closer to the properties to increase the open area. That would be part of the discussion I think we'd have to hold with the people at number 49. And the final question, which has now eluded me.
Is there an option not to have a path at all to make it a much larger open space?
Through the chair, I suppose we were just trying to maintain public access through the reserve, whether it be pedestrians and or cyclists, by providing the path. But, I mean, obviously that is an option. We could delete the path north of the vehicle access to those two properties.
Through the chair, it's probably also just worth noting that that design quite deliberately and opportunistically relies on using the existing road pavement. That's why the path alignment is shown in that location and configuration, because it would avoid the need to have to reconstruct a new path afresh, because, for example, red asphalt could just be laid on top of the existing road surface, and the remainder of what is currently the road pavement from curb to curb would simply be cut out and extracted and sent to landfill, or otherwise reused if possible. So yes, it could be done, although it would likely increase the cost of the project compared to what administration has estimated.
Councillor Gontaszewski and then Councillor Hallett.
Just another question on the fencing. The report seems to state that the fencing will be removed or relocated, sorry, the existing fencing on the eastern side of the park will be removed, and that there will be fencing constructed on the southern side, and the fence on the northern side will be extended. This seems to be sort of a fairly final assessment of what's going to occur, whereas the diagram that I presume will be included with consultation documents, should it go to consultation, seems to offer that the existing fence on the eastern side may be removed or relocated. I guess I'm just conscious of the some of the other discussions we've had around fencing options and wondered whether it would be worth surveying the community around whether a fully enclosed park was preferred for this location, as it does appear to be used primarily as a park for quite young children and families, which may not necessarily... which may lead people to have a preference for an enclosed park as opposed to a park that actually has access to a driveway, even though it is unlikely to be used on a frequent basis.
Can I also just follow up on that, because it is pretty much the same question, but I was just interested to know whether the fencing could potentially come, because this is where the car access is happening through the driveway here, whether the fencing could potentially go along the side of where the cars can go, and where the bollard is, potentially have a gate and then be fenced along there. So then effectively you would have a fully enclosed playground, and in terms of issues of it being potentially used as a cycling hotspot to cut through fast, then you'd have to get off your bike and open a gate, which would slow. So could that potentially be looked at as well, whether there's sufficient fencing existing to do that, or whether that would add to the cost?
Through the chair, certainly that can be considered. We'd have to even assess the condition of the existing fence to see whether they're going to recycle that or in fact install new fencing. But yeah, that is an option.
Thank you. Councillor Hallett, were you going to ask a question?
Just whether we have any data on the patronage in the reserve?
Through the chair, I'd have to take that one on notice, because I believe that's forming part of the public open space strategy. So.
And I just have a couple more questions. I'm happy for you to take them on notice. It's just really seeking a little bit more detail on how wide the consultation will go, just given that it is a potential street closure. I think that I'd prefer to see more than less. And in relation to what the overall increase in square metres of the park would be upon completion as proposed. Thanks. Councillor Gondaszewski.
Sorry, and just in line with that, if I missed this, I'm sorry, just also whether the area of current turf that's proposed could be provided?
Through the chair, we can provide that information for next week.
Doesn't look like there's any more questions. No? Okay. We'll move on to the next tech services issue, which is proposed road safety and traffic management improvements in Redfern Street, North Perth and Randall Street in Perth. Questions on this item? Councillor Loden.
Through the chair, for Randall Street, were options other than speed bumps considered for... it seems that the intent is to provide a deterrent to people for using the street, but were there options other than speed bumps suggested or considered, such as horizontal dislocation or road narrowing? And if so, why was it not a valid option? Sorry, and also on that same topic, given that the intent seems to be to discourage people from rat running, will low-profile speed bumps actually achieve that intended purpose, or will people still just shoot down that street and just go over the low-profile speed bumps?
Through the chair, the proposal for the speed humps was actually driven by the residents and it was brought to the Road Safety Advisory Group meeting on the 27th of April, and we actually did discuss alternative traffic calming measures, whether it be single lane slow points, mid-block blisters, and the residents themselves actually drove the request for speed humps. It was their preference. They'd done their own research, and their conclusions were that evenly spaced low profile speed humps would actually work better in their street than the horizontal displacement measures.
Councillor Loden and then Councillor Gondaszewski.
So from the Road Safety Advisory Group's opinion, do they think it's going to achieve the intended purpose?
The 85th percentile speed of the street is marginally over the 50k an hour now, so actual speed is probably not the issue. It's more the rat running, and particularly the AM and PM peak periods where people are using the opportunity to avoid the lights at Buller and Fitzgerald. So the aim is to really deter more the rat running than more so the speed. I think it will be beneficial, but I don't think it's going to be a dramatic change.
This is just a follow-on from that. I guess, would it be possible for council to be privy to the research that might indicate this particular option as being appropriate for this location? So if the residents have done that work, that's been communicated to the Road Safety Advisory Group, could that be please added to the report so that there is more of an evidentiary basis for the selection of this particular option? I also was wondering if I could get talked through how the raised plateau would act in preventing a truck accident at the intersection. Is it because it addresses the speed issues by levelling the intersection so vehicles would slow on entry rather than on the way out of it? And whether that could be explained. And I guess also, was there a... if I've missed this in the report, my apologies. Was the road usage and traffic data able to determine the speed difference between commercial and other vehicles in that intersection? And where were the sensors located? Were they actually located close to... Because I noticed that there didn't appear to be a speed issue at... based on the information that we're provided in terms of the sensors, but were they located in proximity to the intersection?
Through the Chair, starting once again with the last question first, we try and put the classifiers obviously not too close to the existing speed humps, which is a series of them in Redfern Street, nor too close to the intersection, which is obviously controlled in one direction. So we try and find that mid-block area that we're going to maximise the speed data. So in that instance, they would have been in the vicinity of 50 metres either side of the intersection. In regards to, once again, it was that particular treatment was driven by the residents of Redfern Street who attended the Road Safety Advisory Group, and the advisory group actually has 8 community members, and they have a reasonably diverse professional background, including a couple of civil engineers, and that was the consensus reached with the Road Safety Advisory Group members in general and the residents as their preferred treatment for that intersection. It's a more expensive option than merely putting speed humps in. It is effective in that it's a 4-way intersection, and the concern was that you also have the issue of people using Hunter Street from the other 2 directions, north and the south, and the east-west movement. I agree that the speeds aren't particularly problematic. It was the residents' perception and of the volume of heavy vehicles that are using that street currently, and that we have no ability to stop, and they foresee that that is a grade down from either direction, that if a truck has difficulty stopping, then there's potential. I'm going on the residents' perception, not necessarily mine. They were concerned about the potential for a vehicle accident involving a truck, particularly if someone didn't give way or stop at the stop control.
Is there... look, okay. Yep, no. So my next question is, when we've sort of discussed traffic calming in relation to individual streets, we've previously been able to access some statistics in relation to comparable streets or adjacent streets, and just in relation to the issue of trucks not giving way to a give way sign at speed, and whether there's any sort of analysis that we can get to see whether this intersection is potentially at more risk than other intersections across the city that would warrant intervention.
Through the Chair, there in the report, I actually do mention that there's only been one reported accident at this intersection in the last 5 years, and it's below the network average. So there's no indication that will be further accident or future accidents.
Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you. Just can I request an amendment and flag another one? So the one I'll flag is the deletion of 1, and the amendment I'll request is so that's getting rid of the Redfern Street. I'll just flag it as an amendment. I'll speak to it next week. And 3 with Randall Street, can we also get an alternative plan as an option? And I'm not intending to go out with 2 plans, but we can maybe decide here, but an alternative plan that just has some landscape nibs as opposed to speed bumps, and we can get some commentary around that from our expert staff, and we'll maybe decide that in here. But so 2 options to consider at council, but with the intent to only send one out to advertising, either humps or some landscape nibs to try and narrow the road and the perception of the road, and maybe some information where we've used similar treatments elsewhere to and the impact that has had. Thank you.
Councillor Hallett.
Through you to the Director of Technical Services, Acting Director. Just wondering if also maybe within those there can be some consideration around what implications there are for cycling folks using those roads, particularly the Randell one, and whether either speed bumps or nibs can be designed in a way that won't become barriers for those.
Through the chair, so I can make that amendment and prepare that for next week.
Councillor Buckles.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Question through to the Director of Technical Services. I just note on the financial implications that we're talking about going ahead with the... So I've just lost my iPad, not responding. Putting in the nibs is item 2 for Walcott Street, Redfern Street, and going out to consult on the raised platform area. But the budget suggests that we wouldn't do the raised platform area until 18-19, so it wouldn't be next year. Would we actually intend on revisiting the speeds and find out whether or not would we get a report on whether or not it was effective before you went on and did the other point, or would it, rather not just consultation? It just seems we're doing something in the next financial year that we could find out if it worked or not before we received any sort of recommendation about the central platform, which may or may not remain part of the item anyway.
Through the chair, the intersection of Walcott and Redfern is approximately 300 metres from Hunter and Redfern, so it's a considerable distance between. The idea with the Walcott and Redfern one is I think it's a good improvement to better control the actual traffic movements through the intersection, and it will then impact on the speed because, as discussed in the report, there's a small neighbourhood shopping centre there. That's their primary vehicle access in and out of that point, so I think it will actually improve the safety of the intersection. The doesn't immediately impact upon the Plateau, and from my discussions with them, some of the residents of the street, not everybody's supportive of it, which is why we're recommending consult on it, because it may yet come back that not all residents are in support of the Plateau.
Look, I do want to ask some questions about the Plateau because it is an expensive treatment, and I'm just wondering whether we can get an idea of current locations of plateaus in the City of Vincent of this nature, and also whether there could be any alternatives put forward that would not be as costly, given that the speeding issues and the other issues that have sort of been raised tonight in some of the answers that have been given.
Through the chair, certainly. There are, off the top of my head, there's Hutt and Chelmsford. There's up over near the Mount Lawley Highgate area. We've just put something similar in at the Mount Hawthorne Primary School, like Killarney Street. So, yeah, but I mean, I will find other examples. There are other examples within the city.
I would be interested to know whether they are of the same height as the smaller plateaus that have been used across from Hobart Street and on Matlock Street in Mount Hawthorne. Is it because they are quite high? So I'd be interested to know whether this is proposed at the same profile.
Through the chair, no, they wouldn't be. They're probably a little more severe, and the idea is we want to try and slow the cars down for pedestrian crossing, whereas the plateau would be in the vicinity of 75 mils high, which is typical of a speed hump.
Are we ready to move on from this item? Yes, okay. All right, look, just because I see that Deb is here with her girls from the Norwood Neighbourhood Association, so that Deb doesn't have to sit through more torturous questioning on speed humps, we'll just move on to 8.1 so we can take questions on community engagement item 8.1, which is 34 Sheraton Street, Perth. Do I have any questions on this item? Councillor Hallett, is your hand up? Yes.
Sorry, I'm not sure what the protocol is when the relevant director's not here, but I'm wondering if I just pose it to the room or it could just be on notice. Just wondering about the report suggested that the Norwood Neighbourhood Association didn't have the capacity to manage the facility on a day-to-day basis. Is it possible to get some specifics about what that would have required in terms of capacity from them? And then also this was raised in a workshop previously, but just for the benefit of the people involved, locals, people in the public gallery, etc., is it possible to get a summary of any support historically that the city's provided the association in relation to building capacity, building their membership, and also supporting the governance of the organisation?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I can provide some information. It's not going to provide a complete answer to all of the questions, Councillor Hallett, but on the first matter in relation to the actual facility itself, it's just worth noting that reports were presented to Councillor over a number of times over the last 7 years, whilst Council and the City has been entertaining this particular concept. The reports that most deal with or address the issues that you've raised in the first question are probably the report from February 2016 and October 2014, and then also some earlier reports, but we can extract that information for you. In relation to the second question about capacity building, the City has provided some assistance to the NNA to try and assist them with wayfinding, but it's really not been of any high intensity or perhaps probably not generated the same kind of results as the NNA would have liked. And I note that one of the reasons the NNA has suggested might have been a contributing factor to its comparatively low membership at this point in time is the absence of a facility for them to call home. So I know that that's one of the points that has been raised by the NNA. But I can liaise with the City's Community Partnerships team to see what background and evidence we have for the last 7 years of how the City has partnered with the NNA to try and support its growth.
Just on, I guess on notice, or potentially to the Director of Corporate Services, in relation to, say, potential lease obligations of a facility in this nature or similar facilities, it would be useful to get sort of an understanding of just, I guess, following on from Councillor Hallett's comments in relation to the facility, as to what the costs would be associated with maintenance and operations of such a facility, and what, in general terms, the City, under our current leasing arrangements, expects the occupants of such facilities to fund in terms of asset maintenance and renewal and so on.
Through the Chair, yes, we can provide that information. So we certainly have standard information in terms of what a lease would provide, but I think we can also dig up some of the information in respect of what the operating costs of the facility were.
Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions. Happy for them to be on notice. One, we had requested at the workshop, and understand that the Director's not been available, but we had requested whether there'd been a heritage assessment undertaken of the property, and that information, as far as I can see, isn't included in the report. It may well not have been, but just whether that information was available. And I know that in the comments section it says the state government has indicated they may sell the land. Have we had any clear discussion with them in recent weeks as to the recommendation, and has there been any reaction to that about the possible future use for the land? And also, third question relates to the financial implications. The $147,000 that's quoted in there as having been spent thus far, plus the best part of 17 on the needs analysis. Is that actually money expended that doesn't account for internal working time, or that's actually physical dollars spent on goods and services. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor Cole, my understanding is that the vast majority of that larger amount was on the roof replacement. Yep. And also there's ongoing costs previously for fencing as well.
And through you, Mayor, just in relation to the second question and the discussions with the state government, we'll have to take on notice whether there's been a discussion had since this report was prepared, but prior to the report being prepared, there were discussions with the state government regarding their intention, and they have not provided us with any information regarding their intention for that site or otherwise, other than the MRS amendment, which is mentioned in the report, which has owned the land urban, but that doesn't mean that a Parks and Recreation reservation wouldn't be appropriate and a continued, but there's been no indication as to their future intentions.
So just in relation to the heritage assessment question, if in the event that there hasn't been a heritage assessment undertaken, given the volume of information we would have in relation to the building, would that be something that we could do a desktop version between now and next Tuesday, or would it require more time than that?
Through the Mayor, we can provide a desktop assessment as part of the briefing notes, but it won't be a comprehensive assessment, and it won't have comments from the Heritage Council. So.
I just want to ask a question in relation to the timeline that was presented in the report, and I thought that one of the issues that that came up for me, for perhaps for those council members who haven't been on council for as long, was that sort of critical time around 2014 where council did have a substantial amount of money on budget for refurbishment work, so that it wasn't just simply the Lottery West grant, but there was a substantial amount of funding that was proposed from the city. Could that information please be included in the report? And I also just wanted to ask that there are the other options that are canvassed in the report. At the time that the new childcare centre came to council, the applicant, I think on more than one occasion, did state that they would like to offer the childcare centre for community use in the evenings when the children were no longer at the centre. Whether or not that follows through, I think that would be worth following up, and if we could potentially contact the applicant in that matter to see whether that's something that they would still consider.
Through you, Mayor Cole, just in relation to the first question, the financial breakdown was included in the report that went to council in October 2014, so that will be quite simple for administration to extract that and include some of that detail in this report.
Are there any further questions on this item? Okay, we'll move back to technical services. So the last item in technical services for this evening is item 6.3, Betty Park Leisure Centre remedial works. Quite a serious item. Are there any questions on this matter? Councillor Loden.
Just one question on the coming back with a report back to council. It talks about March 2018. Will that be sufficient to fit into the budget process for 18-19 as well?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, I expect it absolutely will be, because that will be the last point in time that matter comes to council. There will absolutely be ample opportunity for the shaping of that work in the meantime prior to that end date. So, yes.
Any further questions? Okay, I just have two questions on this item. I'm just seeking confirmation that the pool deck light poles were removed on the 13th of June and whether that all went well. And in relation to the design and scope of the works for the figure of either 250 to 500,000 and the tender, what's the approximate time frame for that to occur, please?
Through the chair, yes, the lights were successfully removed on the 13th. And in respect of the second part of the question, we want to try and make a move, obviously, on a lot of this as soon as possible, as soon as the adoption of the budget, and start sourcing the technical advice and go to tender as soon as possible.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we can liaise with the structural engineering consultant that we've appointed to assist us in scoping that body of works, and then include some information in the report regarding timing of when tenders are likely to be released.
Thank you. Are there any further questions on this item? Okay, I'll move on to corporate services. Item 7.1, investment report, 31st of May 2017. No questions. Item 7.2, authorisation of expenditure for the period 1st of May to 31st of May. Councillor Hallett.
Sorry, I feel like this might have been answered a couple of months ago, but just wondering if we've got a proportion of our electricity from Synergy in green power?
We'll have to take that on notice. To the best of my knowledge, no, but we'll take that on notice.
Any further questions on expenditure? Okay, we'll move on to financial statements as of the 31st of May. Do we have any questions on this item? Okay, I just have a couple of questions, Director. I'm just looking for a little bit more information, if possible, on the overspends, particularly on the Ellesmere Street footpath, given that that was almost double what was envisaged, and also the significant underspend on Les Lillyman, given that we're now not proceeding with phase 2 of the Les Lillyman pathway until I think it's 18-19. I'm just interested to know that that came in quite significantly under budget.
Through the Chair, yes, we'll provide that information in the budget report.
Okay, moving on to 7.4, the Delegated Authority Review 2017. Any questions on this item? I have a question. Does anyone else want to go first? No? Okay, my question is in relation to disposal of property and assets up to the value of $250,000, with that currently being $20,000. When considering the question here, I was thinking about the Virgin Britannia Road that came to council, and I just felt that I'm trying to ask a question. I'm just interested to know, it does talk in the report about $250,000 being arrived at, given that that's the tender amount, but is there any other grounds for the $250,000 amount, given that it is a relatively significant increase? And is there any standard figure on delegation of this nature across local government, and could it potentially exclude the sale of land?
Through the Chair, in terms of whether there are any standard amounts or how that $250,000 has been selected, it's aligned to the delegation that the CEO has in terms of expenditure, so it's simply aligned there. Council can choose any lower limit that they feel comfortable in, and it's highlighted that the delegation is still bound to comply with due process and legal process in terms of disposition of land, whereas there are very, very few exclusions or exemptions that are provided for land. So that's an automatic condition or limitation that's imposed on the delegation anyway. But as I said, if council chose a lower limit, particularly in terms of land, that wouldn't be a major issue.
Through you, Mayor Cole, probably the land example mentioned earlier is not an entirely applicable one in this case of the proposed delegation, because condition 2 of the proposed delegation expressly says subject to the disposal of any land and or building assets being specified in the annual budget or corporate business plan. Both of those documents must be approved and adopted by council, so it would not be possible for me to dispose of any city land or building asset unless they were specifically accounted for disposal under the corporate business plan or the annual budget.
Councillor Doppelberg.
Thank you. Question to the CEO or to the Director of Development Services. Are you comfortable with the delegations in relation to planning matters being sufficient, given that we have, since these were last reviewed, we've shifted to a monthly meeting cycle, which obviously has time-bound implications, particularly where leases are involved and people have often it's difficult for us to assess within our statutory time frame. Generally speaking, most commercial landlords won't accept due diligence longer than about 90 days, and often we struggle to meet that, plus meeting our meeting schedule. So are you satisfied that the delegations that are provided are appropriate given the monthly meeting cycle?
Through the Mayor, yes, the delegations are appropriate for the City to achieve the 90-day statutory time frame that's set out for applications that are advertised, which is almost every item that I'm aware of since I've been with the City has been a 90-day time frame. There, as I've discussed previously, there are concerns at the moment from some applicants that the time frame is being exceeded, and that is a concern. And as part of the next Council July round, there will be part of the information bulletin will provide information on the number of applications that are exceeding that 90-day time frame. That's a procedural issue. The delegations aren't the cause of those delays. It's caused by the processes and resourcing of the team, which, as I've discussed previously, are being addressed. We can see that in the numbers already occurring. Where applications exceed the statutory time frame, the City is committed to addressing that issue with the applicant as soon as possible, in a manner that's suitable to both parties. So I don't believe the delegations need to be changed to address those issues. They can be addressed within the current framework.
Are there any further questions on this item? Okay, we'll move on back to community engagement. So if we just if the CEO cannot answer the questions, we'll take them on notice. So we're at 8.2, which is adoption of the community funding policy. Any questions on this item? Councillor Hallett?
Thank you, Mayor. To the CEO or on notice, just in relation to the Heritage Assistance Funds, just wondering when the maximum amount for that was last reviewed, and whether we still think that admin considers that still sufficient. And also in relation to the eligibility criteria, whether a larger building that contains multiple residences and therefore has multiple property owners attached to it would have the opportunity to apply collectively for a larger amount.
In relation to the fund and the funds available and included in the budget, we have reviewed that as part of this budget round, and we do consider that there's adequate funds available. In previous years, we've carried some of the funds forward where there's been applications, and we've found that as part of the review we've undertaken this year that there is actually adequate funds in the budget each year, and we've been caught in a cycle previously of carrying funds forward. So we consider there's adequate funds as part of that review. I'll have to take the second question on notice to speak to the team about whether a group coming together to address an issue would meet the standards. I think they would, but I'd need to take that on notice just to confirm.
Councillor Toppelberg.
Just for clarity, with the Heritage Assistance Fund, am I correct? My understanding is that the works have to be visible in the public domain and at the street front, so effectively you're talking about $10,000 worth of work to the exterior of the building facing the street, which we would fund up to $500 if they qualified for the grant. So it's not actually got any. If it's not visible from the street, it's not eligible for the funding. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's my understanding. Yes, but I'll take it on notice and provide a thorough response.
Any other questions on this item? I'll just flag that I'm not quite sure in relation to clause 1. It talks about the response received dividing public advertising, so just might be a typo there. So if we move on to 8.3, public open space strategy. Any questions? Councillor Loden.
Just two questions from me. The report talks, and this may need to be taken on notice, about targets of 2 hectares per person or 4 hectares per 1,000 people, or 4 hectares per 1,000 people, and a figure of 3.36 hectares, which is where they calculate the 10%, assuming a R code of 10, I think it was. And then the public open space percentage talks about what we realistically could achieve. So my question is, will the strategy basically determine independently what an appropriate hectare per 1,000 people it should be aiming for prior to deciding if it's achievable? And then also, would it look at what this amount would be, assuming a 2% population increase over the next 36 years, which would be a doubling of the population as well? So that's my first one. And then the second one was, that's it.
Through you, Mayor Cole, in a general sense, and this will provide further detail and take the specifics of the question on notice, but generally speaking, the public open space strategy, which is a separate body of work that would arise as a result of this initiative, and also is planned in the upcoming budget and draft corporate business plan revision for the following financial year, is intended to identify the nature, type and distribution of open space throughout the city and provide an evaluation as to whether or not that is satisfactory to meet the needs of the current community, as well as the way in which our community is forecast to grow in years to come. So as to which will occur first, are we going to aim for a target and then see if it's achievable, or are we going to evaluate needs and then try and pick an achievable target, will be up to council to decide as we start to form up the project plan and the details for how that strategy is conducted.
I just have a minor question, which I'll put to the CEO in lieu of the director. Which is just relating to attachment 2, public open space by classification. And I know the classification is sort of, DSR have got guidelines and stuff, but it just sticks out in my mind that it's very difficult to consider Hyde Park as a neighbourhood open space rather than a regional district open space, because it is that's a North Metropolitan Area regional important space in my mind. So I think in terms of us putting importance on things in public open space strategy, it'd be good to have our own spin on priorities rather than just being totally guided by the DSR. That's sort of my question there.
Through you, Mayor Cole, look, that's a valid point, and there hasn't been a great deal of calibration to this inventory. It's really just been administration's effort to really, for the first time, to our knowledge, capture and create a database of what we have in the way of open space assets for the community, what each of those open space areas contains in terms of facilities and the type of purpose or use that they are typically put to. So there is nothing to say that this is a static document that's fixed. Through the open space strategy, there will be ample opportunity for council to review and revisit whether that's acceptable or an appropriate labelling moving forward.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I've asked the question a couple of times in workshops, and I'll ask it again, I suppose, in this forum, because I keep going back to it. And it is a question of the CEO. Given the level of detail that's usually requested, particularly by the elected members, but by the community broadly, are you satisfied that $50,000 is sufficient budget to end up with a strategy document that's going to meet the ongoing needs of the community and the council?
Through you, Mayor Cole, that question has been raised by me to the Director of Community Engagement on a number of occasions, and in this instance the simple answer that I've been given is that yes, it would be, because administration is proposing to do a lot of the work internally, and the $50,000 would primarily be for mapping information and any statistical analysis that the city might require to complete that strategy. It is possible, and the advantage that the city has is that, firstly, now we have a fairly comprehensive inventory of all of our existing open space areas, and we have a population that is going to be growing in intensity rather than in geographical area, as is the case in primarily outer metropolitan growth councils, where it becomes a much more difficult process to carry out an assessment for the community's open space needs moving forward. So the directors assured me that through the evaluation of the draft project plan for this activity and the realignment of his team's resources, working in with the community, also the Development Services Directorate and Tech Services Directorate teams, that yes, that will be achievable.
So just a further question. There's been a lot of talk in recent times about the cost of, I know getting to detailed design work, but design costs. Is the intent going forward that areas that are, or open space that is earmarked for development or for changes of intensity or otherwise, that the detailed design work will be done on a case-by-case basis, or that there'd be future work done to the POS or to the strategy that actually had design guidelines and simple do's and don'ts that fit broadly across the city? Is the intent for that body of work just to be an analysis of the open space that exists and the path going forward, or to get into some of the more universal aspects of design and learning from some of the errors of the past, but also putting forth some basic design ideas going forwards?
Through you, Mayor Cole, it might not be so much design ideas in terms of a illustration of a typical park, but I expect that what we will certainly be aiming for is a level of standard that council can prescribe for different categories of parks that perform different functions within the open space hierarchy that council establishes. So there may be a agreed standard for a City of Vincent pocket park, or a neighbourhood park, or a active reserve at a local level, where council says it should be provided with at least one barbecue and toilet facilities and whatever else, so that we can then start to get into the more detailed evaluation for parks that don't yet have those facilities, and to include that in future budgets and planning to identify, well, how are we then going to bring that particular park up to the level that council has prescribed as being the minimum level for that standard of open space.
So this last question, it may be included in there, but is there, I suppose, well, I'll ask it as a question, but it would be my expectation that universal access and disability access to public open space will be included in the analysis of each of the spaces as well, in line with our strategy. Is that currently in the scope of works?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'll have to check, but I would not expect that to have been an oversight, given that the same directorate that's responsible for taking carriage of this project was also responsible for the DAPE.
Are there any further questions on this item? Okay, we shall move on to the Information Bulletin, CEO 9.1. Are there any questions on the Information Bulletin? Councillor Hallett.
Just in relation to attachment 10, item 9.2, which was the 40-kilometre speed zone trial, it stated that the consultation was scheduled for May, which I think is passed. So just wondering if we could get an update on the timeline for that.
Through the Chair, we've been having ongoing discussions with the Commissioner of Road Safety, rather, about them funding the consultation, which was the agreement that we originally had with them, and that offer hasn't at this stage been confirmed. So it's still our intention to go with the public consultation, but we're trying to clarify.
Do you have a further question, Jonathan? Sorry, Councillor Hallett.
Sorry, at the risk of being a broken record, there's a couple of minutes from advisory groups that aren't included in the information bulletin, and just wondering if we can rectify that in the future.
Yeah, we've recently done a review of the advisory group's minutes and made sure that people are aware of the deadlines of including those in the minutes. There is sometimes a delay between the cut-off of the reports of the council agenda and the production of those minutes, but certainly my expectation was that they should have been included, so I will confirm what should have been included and make sure if they were meant to be here for this round, they will be here next week.
Thank you. Councillor Loden.
Just on the register of notice of motions and register of reports, we've got the listing there, but I was wondering if there's a way we could include something like a next steps and a due date for when those things would happen, so we can see when they would be expecting them to come back to council, and maybe if those change, then a track changes on those for each time. And then the second one was last meeting we had a notice of motion around development applications, just to provide information in the info bulletin of the number of applications we currently have and the number that are overdue. I was wondering if that could be included in the register of notice of motions, and also if that report was proposed to be included in this month as well.
Through the Mayor, it should be included in the register of notice of motion. So if it isn't there, it will be included for next week. And the intention is for it to be provided in the part of the July information bulletin, which was what was set out in the notice of motion.
Further questions on the information bulletin? No? Okay. Yes, CEO wishes to respond.
Through you, Mayor Cole, the information bulletin relating to those two items, I'm just having a look through now, does for the most part describe or nominate an anticipated satisfaction or completion timeframe for each of the items listed in the left-hand column that haven't yet been closed off. So I'm happy to review those. If council members would like that information presented in a different way, then that can easily be accommodated. If the question is to keep this as keep the timeframes described in this information bulletin as static, and then show as track changes any departure from those timeframes, then that can also be accommodated. It should have been happening just through strikeouts and then replacements, as we would with updating the audit log. So we'll certainly do that from this point onwards. And I haven't brought up in relation to the item about development applications, I haven't brought up the specific wording of the resolution adopted by Council, but I note the admin comment says an information bulletin will be provided as part of the July Council meeting agenda. So if reference to July wasn't in the notice of motion, and if the notice of motion actually said June, then we'll see what we can actually present to Council on that case, because the admin comment here says that it could be provided, or it would be provided by the July meeting.
Councillor Toppelberg's just pointed to the notice of motion does say July, so apologies, I thought it said June.
Anything further on the information bulletin? Okay, we'll move to the last item before we move to confidential items, and that is a notice of motion from Councillor Hallett on workforce gender pay equity reporting. Sorry, I've actually found it. Yeah. Are there any questions of Councillor Hallett, or any general questions in relation to the notice of motion? No? Councillor Loden.
Just a minor one on the topic of reporting, and it does talk to a little bit in admin's response, but we'll probably need to do reporting on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander employees, so we should have a view to that at the same time as doing this process as well, which I think is the intent from broadly what the admin's response.
Thank you. Anything further on 10.1? Okay, thank you. That means that we've reached the end of the meeting agenda items that are happening in the public realm, and we now need to move behind closed doors to consider